Good evening and welcome everyone to this webinar about the 1898 Battle of Virden and its legacy. We're happy that you're here. This webinar is brought to you by the Mythic, Mississippi project of the University of Illinois System and the Perpetual Care Association of the Union Miners Cemetery in Mount Olive, Illinois. I'm Helaine Silverman, a professor of anthropology at the U of I in Urbana-Champaign and the co-director of the Mythic, Mississippi project with my colleague, Dr. Devin Hunter at UI Springfield. And before we begin the webinar, we want to thank all of the presenters, and especially we want to give our special thanks to ICOMOS-USA and World Heritage USA for supporting the webinar, and our deepest gratitude to Ariana Start, the manager of these two heritage organizations. She's given us invaluable help for facilitating tonight's event. So thank you for coming. And now it's my pleasure to turn the mic over to Dr. Devin Hunter.
Thank you, Helaine. Welcome to our guests and welcome to our panelists. My name is Devin Hunter. I'm an associate professor of history at the University of Illinois Springfield, and as Helaine mentioned, co-director of the Mythic, Mississippi project. My role right now is to briefly introduce tonight's presenters, and then we'll get into some Q&A with them, and of course, welcome your thoughts and questions as well from the audience. First is John Alexander, who's a longtime resident of Virden and owner of Books on the Square bookshop in Virden and Springfield, which specializes in Central Illinois history and labor issues. He's an expert, as you'll hear, in the history of the Battle of Virden and co-chaired the civic group that created its memorial in Virden's town square. Actress Loretta Williams is a historical reenactor, famous for her personification of Mother Jones at the many events held in the town of Mount Olive and at the Union's Miners Cemetery. She's been portraying Mother Jones since 2017. In addition to her magnificent performances locally, Ms. Williams reenacted Mother Jones at the Centennial Celebration in Matewan and Blair Mountain, West Virginia. She was also received warmly in Cork, Ireland, where she presented Mother Jones to the home country. Joann Condellone is a member of the board of the Mother Jones Museum and of the Perpetual Care Association of the Union Miners Cemetery, both in Mount Olive. She's a descendant of Italian immigrants who came to this area when they mined coal. She's also a local author. So with that, I would like to turn it over first to John Alexander to give a little more introduction to himself and his interest in how he would like to briefly lay out some of the themes of the Battle of Virden. So, John? It's like John's muted.
No, I'm not, right?
Now we're
okay.
Good.
I'll start over.
Thanks, John. Go ahead.
The Great Coal Strike of 1897 won for miners the 8-hour workday, and more importantly, a well-deserved 23% pay hike effective April 1, 1898. But the deal wasn't sealed for their new union, the United Mine Workers of America, until October 12th, 1898, at Virden, Illinois, home of the largest mine in the state and most stubborn operator in the Midwest. Fred Lukens locked out 400 local miners the same day that 97% of Illinois miners got their pay hike. He tried arbitration instead and lost again. Next up, he built a stockade around his mine, hired armed guards to protect it, and sent agents to Alabama in search of African American replacement workers. The 105 duped replacements arrived under heavy armed guard, were ordered to hit the deck, avoiding injury as they approached the mine, where all hell broke loose. White guards killed 8 white miners. 5 white guards were also killed in action. Myth makers, nonetheless, then and now, call this a race riot. They also mislabeled locked out miners and their employed union brothers in arms as striking miners. The same myth makers don't understand the difference between a battle and a riot. One planned the battle, the other spontaneous, the riot. All told, they miscast the miners as strikers rioting because of race, a great insult to the miners and their cause. On the positive side, though, the victorious miners on October 12th prevented the landing of deceived replacement miners, demonstrated their bravery and determination to be included in the new union pay scale. Their union did not leave them behind. Neither did Illinois Governor John R. Tanner, who used the state militia the next day to turn back the company's second attempt to replace the locked out locals. The miners quickly praised Tanner, some calling him the hero of Virden. The legacies of Virden include an annual celebration of Miners' Day, known for years as Virden Day. The historic Union Miners Cemetery at Mount Olive, where 3 martyrs were laid to rest, is another legacy of the battle. Labor legend Mother Jones directed that her body be buried next to her brave boys upon her death, which occurred in 1930. Finally, a stronger United Mine Workers Union emerged from the battle. Before Virden, most Illinois coal miners were not union members. After Virden, the great majority were, and membership in the union boomed, doubling in the next year before reaching 250,000 members by 1904. The union made them strong, then stronger at places like Virden on October 12th, 1898, where Fred Lukens learned a lesson and no one got left behind. Thank you.
Thanks, John. We have just a couple of follow-up questions for you while we have you. And then, of course, you're around to answer questions from the audience. You mentioned how your view that that Virden is often miscast as a race riot, and previous times other people still might refer, broadly speaking, as the Virden riot. Can you tell us what your idea of the difference between a riot and a battle, and how maybe that's evolved over time?
Okay, my thoughts on the differences basically would be these. A battle, like a Civil War battle, let's say, is planned for the most part. Occasionally, armies may have bumped into themselves and fought an unplanned action, but for the most part, they're thought through by their leaders. They are days and weeks and months in the making. That's a battle. And the battle at Virden, as I've been calling it for about half my 80-some years, I grew up hearing that it was a riot as well, but I got convinced several years ago thank goodness, that riots are spontaneous things. They're things that occur at soccer games or football games, or an action that traces to race or ethnicity or something of that sort may spark a riot. But this event at Virden had been in the works for weeks and months. The time between the beginning of the strike in April of 1897 and the battle in October of 1898 is some 16 or 18 months, where anger had been building among the miners because they weren't included in the new pay scale.
Thanks, John. One of the fascinating characters around this story is General Bradley, who will come up from Mount Olive and is often seen as leading the miners in Virden. Can you maybe give us a little bit of a glimpse of the story about General Bradley, and what exactly do we know he was doing at that time in Virden in terms of leading, quote unquote, the confrontation there?
Okay, Bradley's role, he was the leader of the Mount Olive contingent that included about 100 men. Believe it or not, about 1,200 miners, all armed, had gathered at Virden and been there for days prior to the battle. More proof that it was not unplanned. Bradley was a name. He promoted himself pretty well. He was a leader in organizing non-union miners at the beginning of a strike that turned into a lockout later. I don't think Bradley was too happy with his role at Virden. I think he did not want to be just a member of the committee that planned the event. I think he wanted to head it up. But unfortunately, you know, the event involved some bigger names than General Bradley. John Mitchell was at Virden, involved in Virden, as was John Hunter. Mitchell would be the president of the UMWA by the time of the battle. He was a native Illinoisan from Spring Valley. So that's kind of my take on Bradley. I think he's was a real character an interesting person, and he was important during his day, but I think his day had pretty much passed by the time of the Virden battle.
Mm-hmm. Could you maybe pick up the story just a little bit about the year or so after Virden, with the burial and the disinterment and the reburial of the martyrs of the battle, right? There in Mount Olive, kind of an interesting story and a lot of unknowns and conjecture about that part of the story.
Yeah, the battle, as we mentioned, took the lives of 8 miners. Interestingly enough, no one from Virden was killed at the Battle of Virden. Those killed were miners who were almost directly across from the stockade, and the Virden miners had positioned themselves in a different spot on the battlefield, thinking they would be in at the main spot, and as it turned out, they were not. 3 of the 8 miners were buried at Mount Olive. The other 5 went to their own hometowns, Springfield, Taylorville, and elsewhere. The 3 buried at Mount Olive, we'll have experts on the cemetery follow me who probably know this better than I, but 3 were buried at the Mount Olive Cemetery. A long story short is that a year later, the miners wanted to celebrate their lives with an event in the Mount Olive Cemetery. That didn't pass muster with the powers that be in Mount Olive, and the union was denied the ability to do that. Consequently, the union bought adjoining ground to the cemetery, and the bodies of those 3 martyrs were moved into that cemetery. A lot of the details are lost to history, but a good historian from Mount Olive, John Kaiser, has written a nice piece about that in case anybody would like to know more about it.
Great, thanks, John. And before we move on, just remind people, go ahead and ask questions in the Q&A chat if you have for John. We'll come back around to him. if we have time there at the end. Before we go into our next guest, John, could you tell us a little bit more about the more recent and current status of commemoration of Virden in Virden, in terms of the wonderful monument there in the square, and just what's your sense of residents today in Virden here, especially this anniversary year, 125th, and moving on. What's their interest in this story?
Well, I think there's the interest has increased over the recent years, thanks to the 100-year anniversary of the battle, and now the 125th anniversary of the battle, and a beautiful monument we placed on the square in Virden back in 2006, when Cecil Roberts gave a stirring dedicatory address. But I think kids have grown up with a lot of the wrong impressions in Virden of what the significance was of the Virden mine battle. And to be very honest with you, I'm kind of disappointed in the support the city council in Virden has given to the story. They're willing to, host the monument, obviously, but not do a lot more than that. So it's a tough old pill for an old guy like me to swallow.
Well, we're doing what we can. Thanks, John, and you'll stick around. You'll be here at the end, and I know we'll have some questions for you. I've already seen at least one that we'll come back around to and hear from you. Appreciate it, John. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Loretta Williams, who we've seen many times as Mother Jones, but we see her here in her 21st century self on screen. So Loretta, I'll turn it over to you to introduce a little bit more who you are and what your interests are and how you got involved in what you do.
Thank you, Devin. As a historical reenactor, I've been doing this for many years, and I was with Alton Theater, and they would annually have a group that met in the city cemetery called Vintage Voices. So each year I would portray a different character. They'd give me a name of a person, they'd give me an obituary, and the rest was up to me. I had to research the individual, find every kind of information that I could, then create the character's costume and bring in props and everything that would be necessary to educate and to entertain the audience. When I came to Alton, or came from Alton Theater, I was asked to be Mother Jones because I was short, older, and had blue eyes. So I was typecast for it. That's about all I know. Then I've been doing it since 2017. I go wherever they ask me to go. I put on my hat and my shoes and I go.
Great. And tell us, when you were first being asked to perform this part, how familiar were you with Mother Jones, and what's been your kind of evolution in a sense becoming her?
Well, I saw her picture, or the billboard over on the highway that directed everyone to Mother Jones. So I go to the cemetery, and then after that, I realize that there's a biography, so I learn more because I enjoy history so much. And it just evolved from there. As Mother Jones, I had to make my own character. I had to become Mother Jones. Like her, I made my own pattern for the costume. I made the costume. I researched everything I could about her. So
yeah,
it grew from there.
Yeah, you're picking up on that. Like, I've seen you, right, as Loretta, and met you and see you now as Loretta, but I probably knew you first. I think I for sure knew you first as Mother Jones, seeing you in the role and beyond the costuming and even the voice. Like, what's your process, and essentially, because we're channeling Mother Jones when you do the performances?
After I put on the costume, then I listened to the audios of old women from Cork, Ireland that were given to me while I was there so that I could perfect my accent. I listened to these, which that's the hardest part, getting the accent down, because they told me I had a bit of a Scottish inflection in my voice. And I rehearse when I'm writing the material, which is tailored to each group that I speak to. It becomes part of me. And as I channel her, I can't go to sleep after I start working on her speeches. And I'll incorporate things that she has said into current day things, blend them together, so it's as if she's actually standing there with you at that time. I use props that she would have used and illustrations that she would have used. A lot of the stories that I tell have been stories that people in my audience have actually told me, and they'll also supply me with things for my costume, the vintage glasses, the lace in the front. In my hat, there are hat pins and ostrich feathers that came from people in the audience. So I tailor things to the people that I'm speaking to.
It's interesting that that Mother Jones, who was born Mary Harris, was a bit of a performer herself in her role, right? Very, very conscious of her of the symbolism that she was exuding. So, and you've through your work have become an expert on the biography of Mary Harris and Mother Jones. So what can you tell us a little bit about when Mary Harris became Mother Jones?
Well, first, she was just an immigrant, and then she was a teacher. So before she learned to write, which was wonderful. And she became a seamstress, which became a job for her so that she could get around. But then later on, she became a wife and a mother and a writer and a historical, investigative reporter. Mm-hmm. Then she was asked to become, after she was the investigative reporter, she became a labor organizer. And after that, she was an activist. So it was in the time where she was a writer and a reporter that she became Mother Jones. That was just the signature that she put on the papers of the things that she wrote.
And part of that performance aspect was her ability to speak and hold an audience and to motivate people. Obviously, it's a time, before microphones and things like that. What do you know, or what do we know as historians, and as a historical actor, and in particular Mother Jones? What do we know about like her presentation style, and how have you been able to bring that into your own work?
She spoke in a rough vernacular to the miners, but she gave them respect and exhibited motherly concern, wisdom, and love. But yet she spoke to them, particularly in West Virginia, like the Baptist preachers of the day. And she would project and show her anger and shake her fists at the men, complaining about those thieves and murderers and pirates. So she took on the mantle of the people there in the area wherever she happened to be.
John touched on this earlier, about the importance of Virden for Mother Jones, and of course the movement as a whole. But what have you learned about like why the Battle of Virden was so important, of all the really important events and people and places that Mother Jones was involved in, from across the country into other countries, and of course, West Virginia is really important to the Mother Jones story. Why Virden to the point of wanting to be buried next to her boys down the road?
Mother Jones realized that this was the very moment that the United Mine Workers changed history. These boys dying in Virden exhibited strength and courage, making Illinois the best organized labor state in the country. 94% of Illinois was union at that time. The men in Virden were her success story. That's what she'd been fighting for all of her life. She's been wanting fair wages, equality, and justice. And these men died for that. And she was a success because of it, and wanted to honor them by being buried with them at the Union Miners Cemetery.
Mother Jones was a polarizing and inspiring figure, obviously in her time, and almost, certainly upon her death, with massive funerals and memorials, and up to this day. Why do you think Mother Jones continues to captivate us?
Mother Jones was a superhero. She could be brave and courageous and go right into battle and stand against the evil forces of the world. And yet, when she stepped off that stage, she was somebody's grandmother, little old white-haired woman just doddering along. They'd never suspect her. In the mountains in West Virginia, they never suspected that little old woman walking up the hills with her little old shawl and her old hat, that she was actually carrying weapons under her coat.
Great. You mentioned that you have performed Mother Jones all over, and including Ireland, in Mother Jones' home country. What can you tell us about your trips to Ireland, and what is the perception of Mother Jones back there, and how they receive your performance? This Midwesterner in the United States coming over and presenting. You mentioned some of the accent work that or tips they've given you. What's it like to go to Ireland and perform Mother Jones?
Oh, I was so warmly received. It's a great country. I was so welcomed. I could walk the lanes by myself where Mother Jones had walked. They showed me everything that was of importance to her at that time. The church where she was baptized, at the baptismal fount, up and down the lanes where her neighbors lived, the cemetery where her neighbors are buried. And they were so kind to me. They even took me to the very spot where she stepped off of the Irish land and last saw her country and came to America.
Thank you, Loretta. Like I mentioned to others when John was talking, please, audience, feel free to ask your questions, Loretta. She'll be around here. I think we'll have a few minutes at the end here for more discussion if we'd like. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Helaine, who will introduce Joann and ask some questions there, and then moderate a Q&A with you, the audience. So thank you.
Well, thanks, Devin. And again, thank you to the participants. It's already been fascinating. Joann, you have played such an important role in Mount Olive and this region in terms of your dedication to not just the story of Virden and the miners, but your engagement with the Perpetual Care Association and the Union Miners Cemetery. So can you tell us about the work that you've been doing, and since when?
Well, I grew up in a union hall, and my great-grandfather, my grandfathers were immigrants from Italy, and they came to dig coal, make a better life, followed their hunger to America. So like many of us in the Union Miners Cemetery, Perpetual Care Association. I have that living memory. That story I heard at the table. That dual language person, one foot in the old country, one foot in the new, sat at the table with us. So it was a part of my perception of what America was, what our history was, and what my place might be in things. So when I moved back to this area, I started working with an Italian organization. And that led me to miners, of course, and a mining program, which led me to Jim Alderson, one of the great keepers of the flame of the story in Gillespie, and Nelson Gurman, and they welcomed me. And I became a member first of the Mother Jones Museum and then the Union Miner Cemetery. Perpetual Care Association. And so I want to tell you about how we got to be and how the cemetery came from the Union Miner Cemetery formed by the United Mine Workers to the Progressives to finally to our organization and what we're doing there today, what we've done for 124 years. This is the 125th anniversary of the Battle of Virden, and next year is the 125th anniversary of the founding of the Union Miner Cemetery. So we know that, and you've heard from John and of it from Loretta about the battle and Mother Jones and General Bradley and the role of the Mount Olive miners and how Mother Jones came to us. And we know that the Battle of Virden led directly to the establishment of the Union Miner Cemetery, as John and Devin discussed. Of the 8 dead, 4 were in the Mount Olive Union. The 4th man was raised in Edwardsville, and his family brought him back to Edwardsville to be buried. And so 3 miners from the Mount Olive Union were buried in the city cemetery. It's called the city cemetery, but it wasn't owned by the city. Sometimes people think that the removal of those miners and the unhappiness with their being buried there was because of the city of Mount Olive. No, it was a privately owned cemetery, and some of the wealthier landowners who objected to what the miners had done to the status quo. They changed the socioeconomic formula in Mount Olive and across Illinois, so they objected to their being buried there. So the Battle of Virden, October 12th, 1898, September 1899, Local 728, United Mine Workers, Mount Olive, bought an acre from a local landowner for $97. And on what was then called Virden Day, October 12th, the first anniversary of the battle, which we now call Miners' Day, they opened their cemetery and they buried those 3 miners in their new hollowed ground. And 10,000 people came to that opening. Now, you know, these miners were still poor. They didn't have a lot of money. Most of them had to travel, but it was so important to them to have that continuing acknowledgement, that respect for the men who died in that battle and for what that battle meant to their lives and the lives of their children, that they showed up that day. So over the years, the cemetery has been added on to 4 times. The last time was in 1931 when there was the last tiny little piece of ground contiguous with the first piece of the cemetery to make way for a proposed Mother Jones monument. So the United Mine Workers continued to run the cemetery, the first established Union cemetery, and as far as we know, the only Union cemetery in the United States. They continued to run that cemetery until 1932, when in Gillespie, another very activist community in Macoupin County down the road from Mount Olive, and now the home of the Coal Museum, one of our great collaborators, A group of miners there objected to the management style and what they saw as the autocratic reign of John L. Lewis, who was longtime, very powerful head of the United Mine Workers of America. There was a great argument over a vote, giving concessions to mine owners during the Depression, and they started a breakaway union in 1932, and the miners in their very articulate and powerful women's auxiliary took over the running of the Union Miners Cemetery. And that auxiliary started a campaign to raise funds to build the Mother Jones Monument. And they got nickels and pennies and dimes in letters and notes from children and people across the country to do that. Before the time for the monument to go up, people continued to be buried in the Union Miners Cemetery. General Bradley, whom we talked about, died too young, lung disease, and he was buried in the Union Miners Cemetery in 1918. We know that Mother Jones frequently came to Miners' Day, and she had many friends in Macoupin County. She went to Staunton with Eugene Debs to sell his book. She was friends with Adolph Germer, one of the political and labor activists of the time. And in 1923, on one of her trips, she met with Germer in his farmhouse in rural Mount Olive, and they discussed the possibility of her being buried in Mount Olive. He encouraged her to petition the miners' union. She did that. The letter from her lawyer in 1923, that letter hangs in the Mount Olive Mother Jones Museum today. You can see the original there if you come to visit us. And of course, the miners said yes. What she said was she wanted to be buried with her brave boys. And I think that both what John had to say about that battle and what Loretta had to say about Mother Jones and her perception of her role and how she was perceived by the miners and their families makes clear why that was so important to all of them, to Mother and to the miners, to have her there. She was buried when she died at the age of 93, not 100, as she liked to embellish things, at 93. When her body was carried by train from the east to Mount Olive, and 30,000 people attended her funeral in a little town on the prairie of 3,000 people. Hard to imagine until you look at the pictures and you see, yep, sure enough, that happened. So the progressives took over. They raised money for a proper monument. 1936, they dedicated this beautiful monument that stands there today. And the biggest crowd ever to come to Mount Olive and to the Union Miners Cemetery came to celebrate the consecration and of that monument and the commemoration of Mother Jones and the Battle of Virden and the miners, who by this time were all of a piece in the Union Miners Cemetery. So when we think of it, and those of us today who have those roots there, we see that as all of a piece. That Mother is there. We call her Mother because we still think she's our mother. And our ancestors are there, and their families. A wonderful thing for these families to be able to have a decent, affordable place to bury their loved ones as they were coming out of poverty. So that was the biggest event that the Union Miners Cemetery has ever seen. Among those pallbearers that day was a local miner, a Croatian immigrant, like many of our miners who were Croatian and Italian, fought at the Battle of Virden, Matt Jurgovic. Son died in the First World War, also an immigrant Croatian miner. And he was a pallbearer at Mother Jones' funeral. And his family has continued to contribute to the history by donating artifacts, materials, and sharing information with us. So that was probably the biggest event that we've ever held at the Union Miners Cemetery. So 125 years later, we still celebrate what we call now Miners' Day, as the Battle of Virden has receded and the larger story of mining and the hardships of miners around the country and all the battles fought in Pennsylvania and West Virginia and Colorado has come to the fore, and the power and the courage of the United Mine Workers still remains the story. So now it's called Miners' Day. And rather than celebrated on the 12th of October, we celebrated on the first Sunday that's closest to the 12th of October every year. And we have parades, we have banners, we have labor music, we have rousing labor songs, and we have speeches celebrating, commemorating. We started with our wonderful James Alderson, who's in our audience tonight, who was our first General Bradley reenactor, and then it went on to Dale Hawkins, and then Mother Jones, Loretta. Sometimes I confuse them too. Loretta Williams joined us as Mother Jones, so we have those celebrations too. So we're a small group today. We put on these celebrations in collaboration with the Mythic Mississippi Project, the Gillespie Coal Museum, the Mother Jones Museum, Mount Olive. But we're a small group of volunteers. We do not have paid staff, but we learned from our Virden miners and from Mother Jones the value of collaboration and solidarity. We have great friends, not only in the groups I just described to you, but in our unions, especially the Illinois AFL-CIO, at labor councils across the state, the United Mine Workers. When it came time to refurbish the monument in 2015, it was in disrepair. It needed, all monuments need some repair. It was the Illinois AFL-CIO that really spearheaded that. And then individuals and unions and councils donated the $200,000 to keep that monument in repair. So today what we do, the Perpetual Care Association, is we carry on the story. We put on Miners' Day, we serve as docents, we collaborate with other organizations. We work with our sister organization in downtown Mount Olive, the Mother Jones Museum, Mount Olive, which is a program of the city. It's been a great friend in supporting us in every way imaginable, including giving us space for a museum that we, again, a small group of volunteers with no paid staff would be able to do. That museum has a website. We do a lot of publishing in local and regional papers. We invite scholars and labor leaders from around the country to participate in our events. And we carry on the story. We try to follow the good ancestor model laid out by the immigrants before us and become good ancestors too. 2024, our 125th anniversary of the cemetery, big party. We hope you'll come.
Joann, thank you. That is so fascinating. Before I pass to the speakers some of the questions that I can see in the Q&A, I do have a couple of questions on my own. So the Union Miners Cemetery, how close a relationship to District 12 or even more local branches of the UMWA do you have to be buried in the Union Miners Cemetery? Like, could a Union miner from Colorado be buried?
Yes. And people who are union activists, Anne Feeney, the great organizer, singer, songwriter, was buried on May Day several years ago. And there is a commemorative bench to her quite near the monument. Families of miners can still be buried there. I have 3 family members buried there. Great-grandparents, great-grandfather who died of black lung at 43. And his son who was killed in the mine, and my great-grandmother. Someday I'll be buried there. So all of us have, who have those ties, have the opportunity, as long as there's space, to be buried in the Union Miners Cemetery. Yeah.
And I think something else that's so important that you've brought out has been the ability to raise funds, for instance, for the repair. And that strikes me as really important because the Union Miners Cemetery is on the National Register of Historic Places,
Right.
but that does not guarantee its survival.
No, we have to do that. It's incredibly expensive to maintain and repair the roads and to cut the grass. So yes, without our union support, and we have wonderful people on our board. We have retired coal miners, we have activists and archivists and historians, and people who have kept the story alive, as some of those that I described. Ed Becker, whose grandfather buried Mother Jones, still runs the cemetery and takes part in our organization. So like any other expression of solidarity, a lot of it depends on relationships. And, you know, we reach out, we ask, and the unions, fortunately, Scott Thomas, who's a retired coal miner, wonderful activist, president of the local United Mine Workers Union, Steve Earle, the district vice president. These people are a great help to us. We have their ear. When we ask for help, we get help from someplace or another among those. But certainly we don't have the funds to do it ourselves.
And Joann, this brings up an issue that John Alexander mentioned, which is the irony of some of these coal towns being so utterly important in the history of labor. So
Yes.
you have Virden, you've got Gillespie, where the Progressives were founded, and you have Mount Olive because of General Bradley and the Union Miners Cemetery, and then the monument. So let me ask you the smoking gun question, which is then, just as John was indicating about Virden, how interested do you think Mount Olive as a town, the residents in it, the municipal government, how interested are they in this extraordinary history and heritage?
We're incredibly fortunate in Mount Olive, as they are in Gillespie, and that there's terrific interest and support. There was a tornado a few years back that knocked down part of Main Street, including the City Hall. The city bookkeeper wrote a grant to add the piece of that building that is our museum to the new building project. So they were wise enough and interested enough to say, okay, yes, we're behind this. And so again, a small group of volunteers with a very small budget could never have built a museum, but the city made that possible for us. They pay our insurance, they pay our utilities, they give us intellectual carte blanche. They never say, you can't put that in there, or this must go in there. And they're terrifically proud of us. We won a prize in this year's homecoming parade for our Mother Jones float. We're terribly proud of ourselves. City council supports us. I went to them and asked, I went to wonderful Durham, and I saw those magnificent banners, and I sat in the Pitman's Parliament and came home and said, we have to have these banners. They help us pay for them. We couldn't have better friends, and we know how fortunate we are. And in my hometown of Collinsville, it's a very different story. They have very little interest in this, what we see as vital part of their history. So yes, we're lucky. We're lucky.
That's great. I'm mindful of the time. I have more questions, but before I do, let me open this up to a couple of questions that I see in the Q&A. Gerard O'Mahony, you are saying to John, a young miner, Ned Long, was killed in Virden. Do you know anything about this? Was he Irish? A young miner named Ned Long.
Joann might be better on that than I. He's the Mount Olive member who was buried in Edwardsville, right, Joann?
Right, Ernest or Ernst, yeah, Long.
Mhm.
The Madison County Historical Society, Cindy Reinhardt, has some wonderful archival material from that family. I would invite you. She's very approachable. Madison County Historical Society has the Fred Long's family passed on to that society a lot of documents around Fred. Terribly impoverished immigrant family. Some of them were German. I don't know if there were Irish roots in there too. He was just 19 when he died. His father was a disabled miner. But that historical society and that historian in particular has that archival information. I encourage you to approach her. She's very sharing.
And we have a question from James Goltz, who is the wonderful cinematographer who has been so generous with his time and his talent at the Union Miners Cemetery in particular. And he was asking a question of Loretta about the involvement of Cork, which you've spoken about, but beyond that, Ireland, beyond the city of Cork, which has been able to both take pride in it, but also deploy this in a this heritage of Mother Jones in a very entrepreneurial way. Is there, do you think, a larger sense in Ireland as James is really broadening his view of Mother Jones?
Gary Mahaney, a county clerk native, was working in New York City, and while there, he discovered Mother Jones and her history here in the United States. When he went back to County Cork, he met with other historians, and they began to research more and more about her and the importance that she contributed to labor. And so they formed a committee and developed the Spirit of Mother Jones Festival. And it's in its 13th year now. And that's why I went there, so that I could speak at this festival. It takes place this next year, July 25th to the 27th in the Shannon Historic District in Cork, right where Mary Jones lived. And it contains seminars where very prominent people who have fought in the world for fair wages, equality, and justice come to speak over this period of time. So it's a wonderful, marvelous place to go visit and to learn more about labor justice, not just in the United States, not just in Ireland, but in the entire world.
And also, her story, as you said, is an immigrant story. She left Ireland, her family left Ireland under duress. That's true, isn't it? That they,
yes,
was going to offer them a better life. Beg your pardon?
That was during the potato famine when they left.
It was.
And so they came to this country in order to survive.
Yes.
And I can see, oh, he's saying thank you. So we've still got just a few minutes. John, I have another question for you. Can you tell us how the Virden Monument in Virden came to be erected? Because we know how the progressives created the monument in the Union Miners Cemetery, but that was in the 1930s. How did the Virden Monument, who got involved with this?
Hey, I know the answer to that one for sure. In 2002, Virden celebrated its 150th anniversary, our sesquicentennial. And we raised some money to put on a fine event spread through a year's time. And at the end of the sesquicentennial, we thought we'd like to leave a birthday present to the community. So we were always interested in mine history, those of us on the committee, and we decided that we would try to raise the money to set a beautiful monument in our town square. We raised $175,000. That got us a wonderful monument that gets looked at every day by travelers along old Route 66 in our community. The idea also was sparked by Margaret Blackshear, who was the president of the state AFL-CIO. She heard my co-chair friend and I pitched this to their group, and she got the fundraising started. Beyond that, the state of Illinois had some funds at that time, and the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity gave us a nice grant. So did the city of Virden. So did miners and their families and unions all over the country. Cecil Roberts made a comeback appearance in the community and gave a wonderful dedication address. And we're quite proud of it, and it's something that if taken care of should be there for a long time.
And also, I know that you were able to commission a very fine artist, David Seagraves, to do
Yes.
the bas relief, whose detail is just extraordinary, and anyone who's interested can research this online.
Right.
So I think it really is extraordinary. And you've got a little kiosk there where you can press a button and hear your voice really describing, or better said, presenting in detail the Battle of Virden. So I think, as now I am going to bring this to an end, but I think just with the three of you already, we begin to see how this little part of central Illinois was such an epicenter for not just the miners, but the whole labor movement, and how it even had a global significance, originally with Mother Jones as an immigrant, and of course, with all of the immigrant miners. I want to thank the speakers for their fascinating interventions, and especially behind the scenes, the person you do not see is Ariana Start from ICOMOS-USA and World Heritage USA, who is the facilitator of this webinar, and to Dr. Douglas Comer, the president of these organizations, for giving us permission. And I want to acknowledge the extraordinary work of the Perpetual Care Association and the Mother Jones Museum, and people like you who are keeping this wonderful legacy alive. So solidarity forever. We hope that you enjoyed this event, and good night and thank you.